Isabella's hands trembled as she carefully held the tray laden with costly wine bottles. Her worn black shoes made barely a sound against the marble floor of Celestia, Manhattan's most sought-after restaurant. 3 months she'd been working there, but the weighty silence that descended whenever certain men entered the private dining area still unnerved her. Tonight, that silence felt heavier than usual. The 8 men seated at the table, all in impeccably tailored suits, emanated an aura of danger, reminiscent of the intense heat rising from asphalt on a scorching July day. At the head of the table sat their leader, a man whose presence sent a jolt through her, for reasons she vehemently refused to acknowledge. His dark hair was swept back, revealing a sharply defined jawline, and his eyes were the color of smoke, seeming to calculate the value of everything they gazed upon. James Moretti. The name had reached her ears in hushed whispers, and she'd observed how the restaurant owner practically groveled before him upon his arrival. Isabella inwardly commanded herself to become invisible, to simply pour the wine and vanish. However, she had come to the harsh realization long ago that invisibility was a luxury not always available to women like her. And tonight, when James Moretti, speaking in rapid, fluent Arabic, tested his Capos, never anticipating a response, Isabella's past and present collided in a single, impulsive moment. She responded to him in flawless Arabic, plunging the entire room into stunned silence. What unfolded after Isabella revealed her understanding of their every word? How did this one instant begin to dismantle the carefully constructed life she had built? And why did the most feared man in New York suddenly regard her as though she possessed all of his deepest secrets? Her story isn't born of fear, but from the weight of deeply buried languages, and the realization that certain men don't merely notice you, they perceive everything you've painstakingly tried to conceal. Isabella had perfected the art of shrinking herself. At 26, she'd mastered the skill of being present yet unremarkable, of navigating through spaces without leaving any impression. It was a survival mechanism honed since leaving her old life behind 3 years prior. That night, she wore her uniform like a suit of armor, a black button-down shirt and black slacks, her natural hair styled into a neat bun that had taken 20 painstaking minutes to perfect. The small gold hoops in her ears were her only permitted jewelry. Simple, professional, forgettable. Celestia Restaurant occupied the top floor of a gleaming glass tower in Midtown Manhattan, offering a panoramic view of the city sprawling beneath like a scattering of diamonds. She had secured the job through sheer tenacity, appearing every day for a week until the manager finally yielded. The tips here could cover 2 weeks' rent for her small studio in Queens. She couldn't afford to lose this. Table 7 needs their wine, Isabella. The head waiter, Marcus, hissed at her. Don't mess this up. Those men. He didn't complete the sentence. He didn't need to. She had witnessed their arrival. 8 men in suits that likely cost more than her annual salary, moving with the coordinated grace of predators. The restaurant had cleared the entire private section, and the owner himself had greeted them at the door. Isabella hoisted the tray, bearing 3 bottles of wine that probably cost $1,000 apiece, and began toward the private dining room. Her reflection flickered in the floor-to-ceiling windows. A slender black woman with warm, brown skin that seemed to glow beneath the restaurant's soft lighting. Dark eyes that had learned to conceal everything, and hands that never quite ceased trembling when she felt nervous. The room quieted the instant she entered. 8 pairs of eyes followed her every move. 7 men were seated around an oval table, but her gaze locked onto the one at the head, James Moretti. She had gleaned enough from whispered conversations to know that he oversaw half of the underground operations in New York. At 32, he had built an empire through intelligence, ruthlessness, and an uncanny ability to stay 10 steps ahead of everyone. He was devastating. It was the only word that fit. Sharp cheekbones, a mouth that rarely seemed to smile, and eyes that appeared to strip away every defense she had ever erected. A small scar bisected his left eyebrow, and she could see the edge of a tattoo creeping up his neck from beneath his crisp white collar. "The Beaujolais," she said quietly, her voice steady through sheer force of will. She commenced pouring, starting with the capo seated to James's right. The man possessed cold eyes and a cruel mouth, and as her hand neared his glass, he deliberately moved it, forcing her to lean closer. She could feel James's gaze upon her, but refused to look up. "Careful, sweetheart," the cruel-mouthed capo said in English, with a thick Italian accent. "We don't want you spilling on expensive suits." "Of course, sir," Isabella murmured, completing the pour and moving to the next guest. She could feel the weight of their assessment, the way powerful men scrutinized women they considered beneath them. It made her skin crawl, but she had endured worse. She would survive this, too. When she reached James, she found his eyes already fixed on her, not assessing like the others, but studying her as though she were a complex puzzle he was trying to solve. She poured his wine, her hands steadied through sheer determination. When she finished, she stepped back, ready to disappear once more. That's when he spoke. "Do you think she understands what we're saying?" His Arabic was flawless, the accent indicating someone who had spent a significant amount of time in the Middle East. Laughter rippled through the table. They believed they were invisible, conversing in a language no one present would understand. Isabella's blood ran cold. She should walk away, should pretend she heard nothing. But the cruel-mouthed capo responded in Arabic, his eyes raking over her with an expression that made her stomach churn. "Of course not. She's just an American waitress. Maybe we can play with her a little." The words struck her like a slap. In the 3 years since her flight, she had allowed people to underestimate her, had concealed every part of herself that might attract attention. But there were boundaries she would not allow anyone to cross, regardless of the cost. Her mouth opened before her brain could catch up. "Ana afam kalama takulan." I understand every word. Her Arabic emerged clear and cultured, the accent refined through years of study and living abroad, unmistakable. The silence was absolute. Every man at the table froze. The cruel-mouthed capo's smirk vanished. But Isabella's eyes were locked on James Moretti, watching shock flicker across features that likely rarely revealed anything. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly, then narrowed. She could see his mind working, reassessing everything about her in a single instant. The intelligence in those gray eyes was almost frightening. "And where did you learn Arabic?" His voice had changed, becoming softer, yet somehow more dangerous. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. She had revealed too much, but she couldn't take it back now. "Beirut. I lived in the Middle East for several years, Jordan and Beirut." One of the capos started to speak, but James raised a single finger, silencing him without a word. His attention never wavered from Isabella's face. "Ma kunt tamalina hunak? What were you doing there?" This was dangerous territory. The truth was complex, intertwined with a life she had worked tirelessly to leave behind. However, something in his eyes told her that lies would be futile. He would detect them in an instant. "Limuda. I was working as a translator for the United Nations." She saw the impact of her words. The implication that she was not only fluent, but professionally trained, that she had held a position requiring security clearance and specialized skills, that everything about her carefully constructed persona as a mere waitress was a lie. James leaned back in his chair, still watching her with that unnerving intensity. Then, to her astonishment, the corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile, but close. "What's your name?" he asked in English now, his voice carrying a hint of something she couldn't quite decipher. "Curiosity. Respect. Isabella." She forced the word past suddenly dry lips. "Isabella Martinez." "Isabella," he repeated as if tasting the name. "Sit down." She blinked. "Sir, I'm working." "Not anymore." He gestured toward an empty chair. "Tonight you're my guest." "Mr. Moretti, I can't." James' eyes held hers. "And you can, Marcus?" he called, not loudly, but the head waiter appeared instantly. "Isabella will be joining us for dinner. Have someone cover her tables." "Yes, Mr. Moretti. Right away." Marcus shot her a look she couldn't decipher before hurrying away. Isabella stood frozen. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to run, to protect the small, safe life she had built. But James Moretti wasn't asking, and men like him didn't accept refusal. She started. Please. The single word, softened by something almost gentle in his expression, cut through her resistance. She sat. The meal that ensued felt surreal. The Capos spoke in Italian now, occasionally throwing suspicious glances her way, but James kept returning to Arabic, asking her questions about Jordan, about Beirut, about her work. She answered carefully, revealing enough to satisfy his curiosity, but not enough to expose the full truth of why she had fled. She didn't mention the threats, the corruption she had witnessed, the documents she had translated that had made her a target, the fact that Isabella Martinez was a name she had adopted when Isabella Rashid had become too dangerous to keep. However, she suspected, watching the intelligence in his gray eyes, that James heard everything she wasn't saying. "Why here?" he asked finally, gesturing to the restaurant around them. "Why serve wine when you could be translating for diplomats?" Isabella's fingers tightened around her water glass. "Sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't the enemy in front of you. It's the one pretending to be on your side." Something flickered in his expression. Understanding. "You ran from something." It wasn't a question. She didn't confirm it, but she didn't deny it either. "And you thought hiding here would keep you safe?" His voice had dropped lower, and suddenly she felt the full weight of his attention on her. Not threatening, but protective. Terrified her more than anger would have. "It's worked for 3 years," she said quietly. "Until tonight." "Until tonight," he agreed. They held each other's gaze for a long moment. In it, Isabella felt something shift. She had spent 3 years invisible, and in a single conversation, James Moretti had seen her more clearly than anyone since she had fled. The question was, what would he do with that knowledge? Isabella had broken her own rule. Never draw attention. Never reveal yourself. Never let anyone see who you really are. But James Moretti wasn't just anyone. And the way he looked at her now, like she was both mystery and answer, made her realize that invisibility might no longer be an option. What happens when the most dangerous man in New York decides you're worth protecting, even if you never asked for his help? Isabella's apartment in Queens felt smaller than ever when she unlocked the door at 2 a.m. Her hands shook as she set down her purse, the weight of the evening finally crashing down on her. She had stayed until the meal ended, endured James' intense scrutiny and the Capos' suspicious glances, and somehow maintained her composure. But now, alone in her studio with its second-hand furniture and water-stained ceiling, she could admit the truth. She had made a terrible mistake. She changed into sweats and a t-shirt, then sat on her bed, staring at the window that overlooked a narrow alley. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. "You left without your tips, Jay." Isabella's heart stuttered. How did he get her number? "I'll collect them tomorrow," she typed back after a long moment. Tomorrow is Sunday. Celestia is closed. She had forgotten. Her mind felt sluggish with exhaustion and fear. Monday, then. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. "I want to see you tomorrow. Lunch. I'll send a car at noon." Isabella stared at the message. This was how it started, wasn't it? Men like James didn't ask. They commanded. She thought of the cruel-mouthed Capos' words, of the way power corrupted, of all the reasons she had left her old life behind. "I'm busy tomorrow," she lied. "No, you're not. You work Tuesday through Saturday. I know your schedule, Isabella." A chill ran down her spine. How much did he know? Had he been watching her even before tonight? "This is inappropriate," she typed. "What's inappropriate is what my capo said about you in Arabic. What's inappropriate is you walking home alone at 2 a.m. through neighborhoods I wouldn't let my men enter unarmed. What's inappropriate is you working yourself to exhaustion when you're clearly meant for better things." Isabella's fingers hovered over the keys. She should tell him no, should block the number, should quit Celestia and find work somewhere he would never find her. Instead, she typed, "Why do you care?" The response came quickly. "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. Noon tomorrow. Don't make me come get you." She didn't respond, but she also didn't sleep. The car arrived at 11:55 a.m. Isabella watched from her window as a gleaming black SUV with tinted windows pulled up to her building. A man in a suit stepped out, not James, but clearly one of his men. Professional, alert, armed, she would bet money on it. She had dressed carefully. Jeans and a rust-colored sweater that brought out the warmth in her brown skin. Her hair in loose curls around her shoulders, minimal makeup, not trying too hard, but not looking like she had given up either. The driver held the door open without speaking. The interior was leather and luxury. So far removed from her normal life it felt like entering another dimension. They drove in silence through Queens, across the bridge into Manhattan, but instead of heading to a restaurant, they went north toward the Upper East Side. Isabella's unease grew. "Where are we going?" she finally asked. "Mr. Moretti's residence," the driver said, his tone neutral. "I thought we were having lunch." "You are. He's cooking." Isabella blinked. James Moretti, crime boss, dangerous man, ruler of half of New York's underworld, was cooking lunch. The building they stopped at was elegant and discreet, the kind of place where you needed more money than most people made in a lifetime just to get past the doorman. They rode an elevator to the penthouse, and when the doors opened, Isabella stepped into a space that stole her breath. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park, modern furniture in grays and blacks, art on the walls that looked original and expensive. But what struck her most was how quiet it was. Not just an absence of noise, but a profound stillness, as though the apartment existed outside the normal chaos of the city. "You came," James said, appearing from what must be the kitchen. He wore dark jeans and a simple black t-shirt that showed the full extent of his tattoo. Intricate Arabic calligraphy running up his neck and disappearing under his collar. In casual clothes, he should have seemed less dangerous. Somehow, he seemed more so. "You didn't really give me a choice?" Isabella said, trying to keep her voice steady. "There's always a choice, but I'm glad you chose this." He moved closer, and she caught his scent. Expensive cologne with hints of cedar and something darker. "Why am I here, James?" He studied her for a moment, those gray eyes seeming to see too much. "Because last night you revealed something about yourself and I have questions. Because I can't stop thinking about you. And because I think you're in danger and I want to help." "I don't need your help. Everyone needs help sometimes, Isabella." He gestured toward the living room. "Come, the food's almost ready." Against her better judgment, she followed. The kitchen was state-of-the-art but clearly used. Spices were lined up on the counter. A well-worn cutting board, and pans showed age and care. James moved around the space with surprising comfort, finishing what looked like a Mediterranean spread. Hummus, tabbouleh, grilled chicken with za'atar, warm pita bread. "You cook?" she said, unable to hide her surprise. "My mother insisted all her children learn." He plated the food with practiced ease. "She said a man who can't feed himself is a man who can't survive." Smart woman. Was. Something flickered in his expression. Pain quickly masked. "She died when I was 15. This was her favorite meal to make when we had guests." Isabella felt something soften in her chest. It was easy to see James Moretti as just a dangerous criminal. Harder to see him as a boy who had lost his mother young, who had learned to cook her recipes to keep her memory alive. They ate in the living room, the city sprawling beneath them. The food was excellent, and Isabella found herself relaxing, despite her better judgment. James asked about her life in Jordan, about the places she had seen, the people she had met. She found herself talking more than she had intended, sharing carefully edited memories of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. "What made you leave?" he asked finally, the question she had been dreading. Isabella set down her fork, her appetite vanishing. "I saw something I shouldn't have. People I worked with, people I trusted were involved in things that made me a liability. When I tried to report it, they made it clear what would happen if I didn't disappear." "Who?" James' voice had gone cold. "It doesn't matter. I left, changed my name, started over." "It matters to me." He leaned forward, intensity radiating from him. "Isabella, the moment you spoke Arabic last night, you put yourself at risk again. My capos talk. Word spreads. If someone is looking for a woman with your skills, it won't take long to find you. Fear clutched at her throat. She had known this, had spent all night thinking about it, but hearing him say it made it real. I'll quit Celestia. Move again. I've done it before. Running isn't a solution. It's a delay. James's hand covered hers on the table, and she startled at the warmth of his touch. Let me protect you. Why? She whispered. You don't even know me. I know enough. His thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand, the gesture surprisingly gentle. I know you're brave enough to speak truth to power. I know you're smart enough to survive 3 years on your own. I know you hide yourself behind serving trays and uniforms, but last night I saw who you really are. And I think he paused, seeming to search for words. I think you're worth protecting. Isabella's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. No one had offered to protect her in so long. She had learned to be her own fortress, her own defender. But God, she was tired, so tired of being alone. I don't want to owe you, she said softly. Then don't. Think of it as mutual benefit. You help me sometimes with translations, legitimate ones, nothing illegal. I make sure no one comes looking for you. We help each other. It was a lie and they both knew it. The way he looked at her wasn't about translations or mutual benefit. It was about something far more complicated, far more dangerous than any enemy from her past. But Isabella found herself nodding anyway. Okay. Okay. James repeated, and his smile, rare and devastating, made her breath catch. She didn't know if she had just made the smartest decision of her life or sealed her fate. But as she sat in James Moretti's penthouse, his hand warm on hers and the city glittering below, Isabella realized she was tired of running. Maybe it was time to let someone else stand beside her for once. Protection comes with a price. But Isabella was beginning to realize that James Moretti wasn't asking for payment. At least not the kind she expected. He saw her, truly saw her, and that was more dangerous than any enemy. Because when you let someone past your defenses, when you stop hiding who you really are, there's no going back. Oh, and Isabella was about to learn that James's protection came with an intensity that would reshape her entire world. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur that felt like living between two different lives. By day, Isabella worked her shifts at Celestia, serving wealthy patrons and carefully avoiding the private dining room. By night and on her days off, she found herself pulled into James Moretti's orbit in ways she couldn't quite resist. He was true to his word about protection. 2 men, silent, professional, always at a discreet distance, began following her. At first it unnerved her, but she quickly learned they were competent and surprisingly respectful. They never intruded, never made her feel watched in a predatory way. They were simply there. James called her every evening at 9 o'clock, sometimes for hours, sometimes just for a few minutes. They talked about everything. Her childhood in Houston, his in Brooklyn, her love of languages, his of chess, her dreams of someday returning to translation work, his complicated feelings about the family business he had inherited. Do you ever wish you had chosen differently? She asked one night, curled up on her couch with the phone pressed to her ear. Every day, his voice was quiet. But my father built this empire, and when he died, I had 2 choices. Take over or watch it tear itself apart. My siblings, my cousins, the families that depend on us. They needed someone strong, someone willing to do what was necessary. That's a lot of weight to carry. It is. A pause. You understand that, don't you? Carrying weight you never asked for. Isabella thought of the documents she had translated, the corruption she had uncovered, the way her whole life had imploded because she had tried to do the right thing. Yeah, I understand. On her 3rd Sunday off, James invited her to his penthouse again. This time, he wanted to teach her to play chess. Isabella sat across from him at an antique board, trying to focus on the game while hyper-aware of his presence. The way he smelled like expensive cologne and danger, the way his long fingers moved pieces with casual confidence. You're distracted, he observed, capturing her night. You're intimidating. His eyes lifted to hers, and she saw amusement there. I intimidate you? You're James Moretti. You intimidate everyone. Not you. You've never been afraid of me. I didn't say I wasn't afraid. I said you intimidated me. There's a difference. What are you afraid of then? His voice had gone softer, more intimate. You, Isabella wanted to say, the way you make me feel, the way I'm starting to need these conversations, the way I look forward to seeing you more than I should. Instead, she moved her queen and said, losing. Chess. At everything. James studied her for a long moment, then reached across the board and took her hand. His palm was warm, calloused despite his wealth. I won't let you lose, Isabella. You can't promise that. Watch me. 3 days later, the careful balance of her two worlds shattered. Isabella was walking home from her shift, her guards trailing at their usual distance, when a car pulled up beside her. Not James's, a sleek Mercedes with diplomatic plates. The back window rolled down, and Isabella's blood turned to ice. The face that appeared belonged to Mikhail Volov, cultural attaché to the Russian consulate, and the man who had threatened her 3 years ago when she had translated documents proving his involvement in illegal arms sales. Isabella Rashid, he said in Russian, his accent thick with a menacing undertone. Well, what a surprise to find you here. She didn't bolt, didn't freeze solid. Years of diplomatic training clicked into place, and she met his eyes with a deceptive calm, even as pure terror coursed through her veins. I think you have me confused with someone else. Do I? His smile was chilling, cruel, strange. You look exactly like the translator who cost me a very, very lucrative position. The one who disappeared before I could express my gratitude. Isabella's guards had picked up on the tense exchange. She saw them subtly closing the distance, hands inching toward concealed weapons, but the Russian noticed that as well. Interesting friends you've made, he observed, a hint of amusement in his voice. I wonder what they'd think if they knew who you really are. Drive away, Isabella said quietly in Russian, her voice firm despite the fear clawing at her throat. Now, while you still can. Or what? Your bodyguards will shoot a diplomat in the middle of Queens? He chuckled, a low, humorless sound. I think not. But I will see you again, Isabella. Soon. The window glided shut, and the Mercedes pulled away from the curb. Isabella stood frozen on the sidewalk, the carefully constructed foundation of her new life beginning to crumble around her. One of her guards was instantly at her side. Miss Martinez, we need to get you somewhere safe. Mr. Moretti needs to be informed of this. No, she started to protest, but her phone was already ringing. James, she answered, her voice betraying her trembling hands. Isabella. His voice was tight, barely leashed fury held in check. My men just reported what happened. Are you hurt? I am fine. You're not fine. Don't lie to me. A pause, then his voice softened, becoming almost gentle. Come to the penthouse now. We need to talk about who you really are. The drive stretched on forever, an agonizing eternity, and when she finally stood in James' living room, she felt like she was facing a firing squad. He was pacing like a caged predator, his phone clutched in one hand, firing off rapid-fire orders in Italian to someone on the other end. When he spotted her, he immediately ended the call and crossed the room to her in 3 long strides. His hands framed her face, his thumbs gently brushing across her cheekbones as he searched her eyes for any sign of injury or distress. Tell me everything, he demanded, his voice low and urgent. No more half-truths. Everything. And so she did. Standing in his luxurious living room, with the dazzling Manhattan skyline spread out beneath them like a glittering carpet, Isabella laid bare the truth about Isabella Rashid. She told him about the prestigious UN position she'd earned through years of relentless study and hard work, about the sensitive documents she translated that provided undeniable proof that multiple diplomats, including the notorious Mikhail Volkov, were deeply involved in a large-scale arms trafficking operation. She confessed about reporting her findings, about the immediate threats that followed, about the supposed accidental car crash that took the life of her supervisor. A crash that was ruled a mechanical failure but that she knew, deep down, was cold-blooded murder. She recounted her desperate flight, her transformation into Isabella Martinez, and the agonizing 3 years she'd spent constantly looking over her shoulder, haunted by the fear that today would be the day they finally caught up to her. When she finally finished her story, a heavy silence filled the room. James stood motionless for what felt like an eternity. Then, he pulled her into a fierce embrace, one hand cradling the back of her head protectively, the other wrapped tightly around her waist. She instinctively stiffened in surprise at first before instinctively melting against him, deeply inhaling his familiar scent, finally allowing herself to be held, truly held, for the first time in what felt like an impossibly long time. "Why didn't you tell me all this before?" he asked softly against her hair, his voice tinged with a mixture of concern and reproach. "Because my truth puts everyone around me in danger," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. "I learned that the hard way." James pulled back just enough to look her directly in the eyes, his expression intense. "Isabella, I run one of the largest organized crime families on the East Coast. Danger is my business, and compared to corrupt diplomats who hide behind immunity." A cold, sharp smile played across his lips. "Those men are amateurs." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Mikhail Volkov just made a serious mistake. He threatened someone under my protection." James's thumb gently traced the curve of her lower lip, and Isabella's breath hitched in her throat. "He's going to learn what happens when you come after what's mine." "I'm not yours," she whispered, trying to regain control, but her voice lacked any real conviction. "Aren't you?" His gray eyes locked onto hers, intense and unwavering, burning with an undeniable passion. "Tell me you don't feel this between us. Tell me you don't think about me the way I think about you. Tell me your heart doesn't race when I touch you." Isabella's heart was racing now, thundering so loudly she was sure he could physically hear it. "James," she began, trying to reason with him, with herself. "I've spent 2 weeks trying to be patient," he continued, ignoring her protests. "Trying to give you space, but I'm done pretending this is just about protection." His forehead gently touched hers, his breath warm against her skin. "I want you, Isabella, not as a job, not as an obligation. I want you in my life, in my home, in my bed, and I want to keep you safe while you decide if you want the same thing." She should say no. She should protect her heart the same way she'd learned to protect her body, her identity, her very life. But standing in James Moretti's arms, with his raw confession hanging between them, Isabella realized she was simply tired. Tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of protecting herself from everything, including the terrifying possibility of being truly happy. "I want that too," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "God help me. I want that too." James's kiss was inevitable, a force of nature, like gravity itself, like the relentless pull of the tide. His mouth claimed hers with a hunger that stole her breath and ignited a fire within her. One hand tangled possessively in her curls, while the other pressed against her lower back, pulling her even closer, melding their bodies together. Isabella kissed him back with a desperate intensity, pouring out 3 years of agonizing loneliness, 3 years of crippling fear, 3 years of painful denial, all released in that single, overwhelming moment of surrender. When they finally broke apart, both gasping for air, James rested his forehead against hers, his eyes filled with a tenderness she'd never dared to imagine. "Stay with me tonight," he said softly, his voice husky with emotion. "Here, let me keep you safe." Isabella nodded, completely unable to form words. That night, she slept in James Moretti's guest room, knowing he was just down the hall, and she slept better than she had in 3 long years. She knew with absolute certainty that there was no going back. When you've spent years hiding in the shadows, being truly seen for the first time feels like standing naked in the brilliant sunlight. James knew all her secrets now, and instead of recoiling in disgust or fear, he'd pulled her closer, wrapping her in his protection. But Mikhail Volkov's sudden reappearance meant that the past Isabella had desperately tried to escape was rapidly catching up to her. As she fell deeper into James's dangerous world, and into feelings she'd sworn she'd never risk again, Isabella knew she would ultimately have to make a life-altering decision. Keep running from her old life, forever looking over her shoulder, or stand and fight, with the most dangerous man in New York at her side. Isabella woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the rich, inviting aroma of fresh coffee. For a brief, disoriented moment, she couldn't quite recall where she was. Then, the memories came flooding back in a rush. Mikhail Volkov, her emotional confession to James, and their earth-shattering kiss. She sat up in the bed, wearing the oversized t-shirt James had lent her, her unruly curls a wild halo around her shoulders. The penthouse apartment was quiet, but she could hear faint sounds coming from the kitchen. James stood at the stove, calmly making breakfast. He changed into workout clothes, and Isabella could now see the full, intricate extent of his tattoos. Elegant Arabic calligraphy snaking down both arms, a stark contrast to his otherwise imposing physique. When he noticed she was awake, his face softened into an expression that made her chest ache with a strange mix of longing and hope. "Morning," he said, his voice warm and inviting. "Coffee, please." She padded barefoot into the kitchen, gratefully accepting the mug he offered. "You didn't have to let me sleep in. You needed it." He expertly plated eggs and toast, setting the plate in front of her. "We need to talk about next steps." "I should leave New York," Isabella said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "Start over somewhere else. Away from you so I don't put you at risk." "No." James's voice was flat, absolute, and final. "You're not running again. We're handling this. James, you don't understand who these people are. They're ruthless." "I understand perfectly." He leaned back against the counter, arms crossed, his gaze unwavering. "Mikhail Volkov is a mid-level operative using diplomatic immunity as a convenient cover for arms trafficking. He's dangerous, but he's also predictable. Men like him rely on fear and secrecy. We're going to take both away from him." Isabella stared at him, trying to decipher his plan. "How?" "By bringing everything into the light." James pulled out his phone, showing her a file on the screen. "I had my people dig last night. Volkov's been sloppy. He's got financial records that don't match his official salary. Communications with known weapons dealers. Secret meetings he didn't log with the consulate. We're going to compile everything and send it to every news outlet and law enforcement agency that will listen. He'll know it came from me. He'll know it came from us." James moved closer, his presence radiating strength and reassurance. "Isabella, you tried to do this alone 3 years ago, and they crushed you. This time, you're not alone. This time, you have resources, connections, protection." "Your criminal empire, you mean?" His smile was thin, dangerous. "Sometimes it takes a devil to fight devils. The question is, are you willing to trust me?" Isabella thought about the 3 long years of hiding, the 3 years of constant fear, the 3 years of wondering if she'd ever feel truly safe again. Then she thought about James, the way he'd instinctively protected her, the way he'd held her last night, the way he looked at her like she was precious and valuable, rather than a liability. "I trust you," she said, her voice firm and resolute. Over the next 3 days, Isabella got a crash course in what James Moretti's resources actually meant. An army of high-powered lawyers appeared, legitimate ones who specialized in international law and complex diplomatic cases. A team of discreet private investigators compiled detailed dossiers on Volkov and his associates. Journalists were contacted through careful, untraceable intermediaries. But most importantly, James had cultivated connections with federal agents who had been quietly trying to build cases against corrupt diplomats for years. Isabella sat in a secure, soundproof office and gave a detailed, sworn testimony, this time with ironclad immunity and protection guarantees. "The documents you translated 3 years ago," Agent Chun said, reviewing her statement with a practiced eye. "Do you still have access to them?" "They were on a secure server." "I don't." Isabella stopped abruptly, a sudden realization dawning on her. "Wait, I backed everything up to a private cloud storage account before I ran. I was so scared I'd forget the details." James's hand instinctively found hers under the table, offering silent support. "Can you access it?" "Maybe, if the account still exists." It did. That evening, sitting at James's expansive dining table with her personal laptop, Isabella logged into a cloud storage account she'd created 3 years ago under a carefully constructed false name. And there it was. Every document she'd painstakingly translated. Every damning piece of evidence of Mikhail Volkov's extensive crimes. This is it? Agent Chin breathed, scrolling rapidly through the files with growing excitement. This is everything we need, Miss Rashid, Miss Martinez. This is enough to bring charges, real ones. What about diplomatic immunity? Isabella asked, a flicker of doubt creeping into her voice. These crimes are serious enough that his home country will waive it or face severe international consequences, especially once this hits the news. Agent Chun looked at her with something akin to awe. You did it. You actually did it. But Isabella wasn't celebrating just yet. Mikhail will know I'm the source. He'll retaliate. He'll try, James said quietly, his voice laced with steel. He won't succeed. That night, the story exploded across every major news outlet. Russian diplomat implicated in international arms trafficking scheme. Evidence provided by whistleblower translator. Mikhail Volkov's face was splashed across television screens and newspaper front pages. By morning, he'd been recalled to Russia in disgrace and stripped of his diplomatic credentials. Isabella stood at James's expansive windows, watching the city slowly wake up, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years. A sense of genuine safety. James's arms wrapped around her from behind, pulling her close. How do you feel? Like I can breathe again. She leaned back against his chest, sighing contentedly. Like maybe I can finally stop running. You never have to run again, he said, his voice a low rumble against her ear. He kissed her temple, his touch gentle and reassuring. You're home now. Home. The words settled into her chest like a missing piece she hadn't even known she needed. Not a place but a person. James had become her home without her quite realizing it. She turned in his arms, looking up at him, her heart overflowing with gratitude and affection. In the soft morning light, he looked softer, younger, and more vulnerable than the dangerous, intimidating man the world perceived him to be. What happens now? Now? His thumb gently traced her jawline, his eyes filled with warmth and tenderness. Now you decide what you want your life to look like. The UN has already reached out about reinstating you. Several translation agencies want to hire you. You could go back to that world if you wanted. What do you want? I want you here. His voice was rough with raw honesty. I want you in my life every day. I want to wake up to you in my bed. I want to keep you safe and make you happy and give you everything you've been denied, but only if that's what you want. Isabella's heart swelled with an emotion so profound it almost physically hurt. She'd spent 3 long years alone by choice, convinced that any form of closeness inevitably meant danger. But James had shown her, in countless ways, that the right person didn't make you vulnerable. They made you stronger, more resilient, more capable of facing anything the world threw your way. I want that too, she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. I want you. His kiss was gentle this time, almost reverent, a testament to the depth of his feelings. Then you have me, all of me, for as long as you'll keep me. That might be a very long time. Good. James smiled against her lips, his eyes sparkling with genuine happiness. Because I'm not letting you go. Safety isn't simply the absence of danger. It's the presence of someone willing to stand bravely between you and the world, protecting you from harm. Isabella had found that unwavering protection in James, and he, in turn, had found something equally precious in her. Someone who saw past the carefully constructed facade of a ruthless criminal to the complex, deeply compassionate man underneath. But as they began to build a life together, Isabella would soon discover that loving James Moretti meant willingly entering a world with its own unique set of dangers and its own unbreakable rules. The only remaining question was she brave enough to fully claim the hard-won happiness she so richly deserved? 6 months later, Isabella stood nervously in the luxurious penthouse that had undeniably become her home, preparing for an event that terrified her far more than Mikhail Volkov ever had. Meeting James's formidable family. They're going to hate me, she said for what felt like the 10th time. anxiously adjusting the elegant, deep blue dress James had insisted on buying her. It hugged her curves perfectly, the rich color making her naturally radiant brown skin glow. Her stunning natural curls were styled in a sophisticated updo, and small, tasteful diamond earrings, a thoughtful gift from James, delicately caught the light. James appeared silently behind her in the mirror, looking devastatingly handsome in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His hands settled reassuringly on her waist, his touch sending a familiar shiver of anticipation down her spine. "They're going to love you," he said, his voice a low, soothing murmur against her ear. "My sister Julia already stalks your Instagram." That's not exactly reassuring. Isabella turned to face him, her brow furrowed with concern. "James, I'm the woman who effectively took their boss away from his duties, who doesn't understand your world, who makes me happy." He gently kissed her forehead, his eyes filled with adoration. "That's all that matters to them. You make me happy, Isabella. They'll see that in about 30 seconds. The family dinner was being held at an upscale Italian restaurant, one of the Moretti family's many legitimate businesses. When Isabella walked in on James's arm, the room fell instantly silent. 10 pairs of eyes assessed her with laser-like precision, and she felt every inch the outsider she feared she was. Then, a strikingly beautiful woman with James's piercing gray eyes and a warm, inviting smile stood up from the table. "Isabella, finally!" Julia crossed the room to greet her, pulling her into a genuine hug before James even had a chance to properly introduce them. "I'm Julia, the favorite sister. These are my brothers, Marco and Dante, my cousins Sophia and Luca, and about a dozen other assorted relatives you'll inevitably forget immediately." The ice immediately broke. Over the course of the evening, Isabella found herself unexpectedly swept up into the genuine warmth and close-knit camaraderie of the Moretti family. They asked about her fulfilling work with the private translation firm, doing legitimate contract work, and about her life in general. They teased James mercilessly about being whipped, about smiling more often, and about actually taking days off for the first time in years. "He's different with you," Julia confided in her later when the men were all engaged in a heated debate about sports. "Lighter, like he can finally breathe again. He did the same for me," Isabella admitted, her voice soft with gratitude. "Gave me back my life." "Then welcome to the family," Julia said sincerely, squeezing her hand reassuringly. "Because trust me, he's not letting you go." Later that night, back at the penthouse, Isabella found James standing alone on the balcony, gazing out over the glittering cityscape. She wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her cheek contentedly against his broad back. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice filled with heartfelt emotion. "For what?" "For sharing them with me, your family, your life, for making me feel like I truly belong." James turned in her arms, his hands gently cupping her face, his eyes searching hers. "You do belong here with me." He paused for a moment, taking a deep breath, then reached into his pocket, his expression suddenly serious. "Which is why I have something to ask you." Isabella's breath caught in her throat as he opened a small velvet box, revealing a breathtakingly beautiful ring. A stunning sapphire surrounded by sparkling diamonds, both elegant and uniquely striking. "Isabella Martinez. Isabella Rashid. Whatever name you choose, whoever you want to be, I want to be there for it. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want to protect you and cherish you and argue with you about stupid things and make you laugh until you can't breathe." His voice went rough with barely contained emotion. "Marry me, please." Tears streamed down Isabella's cheeks, blurring her vision. 6 months ago, she'd been completely alone, terrified, and utterly convinced that she'd never be safe again. Now, she stood in the loving arms of a man who had moved heaven and earth to protect her, who had given her back her name and her voice, who looked at her like she hung the stars in the sky. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, yes, yes." James slipped the exquisite ring on her finger, then kissed her with a passionate intensity that promised a lifetime of unwavering love and devotion. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and laughing, Isabella realized something profound and life-altering. She'd spent 3 long years learning to survive alone, honing her instincts and building impenetrable walls around her heart. Now, she was embarking on a journey to learn something infinitely more rewarding: how to truly live with someone who loved her completely, unconditionally, and without reservation. "I love you," she said against his lips, her voice overflowing with emotion. "I love you so much. I love you too." James's smile was radiant, completely transforming his usually serious face and revealing the pure joy that filled his heart. "My brave, brilliant, beautiful wife-to-be." The word wife filled her with a sense of profound joy instead of fear, because with James, Isabella had finally learned that love wasn't about losing yourself or sacrificing your identity. It was about finding someone who helped you become more fully and completely yourself than you'd ever been alone. They stood together on the balcony as the city lights sparkled far below, wrapped securely in each other's arms, no longer running from the ghosts of the past or consumed by fear of the unknown future, but simply living in the present moment, loving deeply, and choosing each other over and over again. The courtroom was packed with journalists, curious diplomats, and determined law enforcement officials. Isabella sat calmly in the witness stand, poised and professional in a navy blue suit, her sparkling wedding ring catching the light as she gestured confidently. James sat in the gallery, his unwavering presence a steady anchor in the storm. This was the final trial, not of Mikhail Volkov, who had already been sentenced in Russia for his crimes, but of his American co-conspirators, the individuals who had aided and abetted his illegal activities on American soil. Isabella's detailed testimony was the linchpin of the prosecution's case. She delivered it with unwavering conviction and the newfound confidence of a woman who had fully reclaimed her voice. "And you're absolutely certain about the contents of these documents?" the prosecutor asked, his voice sharp and precise. "Absolutely certain," Isabella said clearly and resolutely. "I translated them myself. They detail systematic corruption and illegal arms trading spanning 5 years. When she stepped down from the witness stand 2 hours later, James was waiting for her, his eyes filled with pride and admiration. He pulled her into a tight embrace, and she instinctively breathed him in, grounding herself in his familiar scent and the solid strength of his presence. "Proud of you," he murmured against her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "Couldn't have done it without you." "Sure you could have," he said with a playful grin. "But I'm glad you didn't have to." They walked out of the courthouse hand in hand, and Isabella paused on the steps, looking up at the clear blue sky. She thought about the woman she'd been just a few years ago, scared, alone, and desperately hiding from her own shadow. She barely recognized that person now. Now she was Isabella Moretti. She'd proudly taken James's name, reclaiming the essential parts of her identity she'd been forced to hide while simultaneously building something entirely new. She was no longer running, no longer consumed by fear. She was standing her ground, speaking her truth, and finally living her life to the fullest. That night, back in the luxurious penthouse that was now truly her home, she curled up against James's side on the plush couch. He was casually reading emails on his phone, one hand absently playing with her hair, a gesture she found incredibly comforting. "James? Thank you. Thank you for seeing me. For really seeing me, even when I was desperately trying to be invisible." He gently set aside his phone, pulling her fully into his lap, his gaze intense and loving. "Thank you for letting me see you, for trusting me with all of you. The parts you readily show the world and the parts you carefully hide. For choosing me every day. Always," Isabella promised, her voice filled with unwavering devotion. "I'll always choose you." And in a breathtaking penthouse overlooking the glittering lights of Manhattan, wrapped securely in the loving arms of the most dangerous man in New York, who had unexpectedly proven to be the safest and most comforting place she had ever known, Isabella Moretti smiled. Because sometimes, the greatest act of courage isn't running away from danger. It's running headfirst toward love.